the opposite. Well, during this time, these last several years, have all of the persons entitled to a pension check gotten their checks in full and on time?
Yes.
Would they have if these overpayments weren't made?
Yes.
Now, we know what the alternative is in terms of what's already taken place in this last year. We have had these bathrooms that have been cleaned in elementary schools every other day instead of every single day. If the pensions were, let's say, years out, let's say that you're right, the actuaries, the experts are wrong. If that were to happen...
Mr. Hicks, before you go any further, the point that the experts are wrong, I just want to make sure is clear. They told us in October that they were changing mortality tables soon, but weren't sure when, and it was going to be a negative impact. They told us that as part of our consideration of what to do. That's step one. Step two is it was not a conscious decision to not revisit this. Level funding pension at $1.8 million for as long as I've been here was the status quo. So even when we got into dialogue this year, it never dawned on me to bring the issue forward. And lastly, the actuarial reports are done annually. So we turn those actuarial reports over to the city auditors. The city auditors write what we do into city audits. And so it's publicly acknowledged what's been going on for the last years as well. So try and understand the context. I understand the inflammatory nature underneath in which we're having a conversation, but understand the context of what took place as opposed to an isolated opportunity. That's not the way it was approached, so I hope you can appreciate that. And then lastly, I mentioned it earlier in my presentation and I'll reiterate it. I was told the prioritization of budget return was we're $1.1 million short on tuition. RIDE said, no, you can't do it. And so to the point of we cannot operate a budget knowingly being deficit, the first $1.1 million back into the district would have gone to pay tuition. The next level of point would have been to take care of the $500,000 that was covering the sports, and then the third item would have been the principal and interest. So we were at least $3.5 million away from putting any more dollars into something else within the district. That was the marching orders I had received since the budget was first put together, and RIDE sent us the notice to the superintendent's office that your waivers are all being denied. So just to put it in context, I know folks want to say if you had it, we would have had the custodians back, but I don't think that would have been where it would have been. It would have been, we have this obligation, they're going to defund us, you've got to pay the tuitions. Where do we go next after that? Just to put it in context. But I get the gist of everybody's concerns this evening. Very loud and clear.
For context, I believe earlier that you said that the funding over and beyond is a best practice or language to that effect?
I wouldn't call it best practice. It was protected the downside long term. I'm a firm believer in 3 to 5 year fiscal management. I don't think you can turn a ship in a 6-month window. And so I've come here consistently promoting the fact about what was successful about the health insurance fund and how long term it pays off, even when they were used to be saying, you've got money there, go take it from there. I used to stand up saying that's not the right thing to do. I think that when we're presenting cost increases, we need to create a structural stream of revenue to pay for cost increase. So like I said, I never dawned on me to even have this conversation because the pension was level funded, it wasn't impacting on a go-forward basis, and to the superintendent's point, $123 million in 2010, $123 million in 2019, and we're still level funding pension. It's the known increases in costs that we've been articulating have been coming down the pipeline, I think we need to wrestle with. And ultimately, at some point in time, I again advocate that we really need to sit down and say, where are we going to be in 2 to 3 years? We all know we have contractual obligations in front of us. We need to plan how to figure that piece out. We all knew I was going to be facing $4 million in salary increases come 2019, 2020. We communicated that in 2017. That's the time to figure out if it's doable. Before a decision is made at the school committee level about a tentative agreement being signed, how can we project funding that in real time? And if not, then we need to give everybody the opportunity to sit down in earnest with our labor leaders and work something out. And I advocate that here for tonight because I live in Coventry and they're running into the same problem. And that's how I want to see my community fixed. And I'm hoping that maybe we can work together to create that model at some point in the future, once we get past this huge hurdle that's in front of us this evening.
Mr. Fucci, just to clarify one issue, sorry, Councilman Ricks, to follow up on your question. In mediation, you had mentioned you had taken money out previously of a pension with no penalty. Can you follow up on that? What circumstance that was that you took out money and you didn't have a penalty or interest?
Yes. I was asked if there's any fees associated with a type of transaction. That was the essence of the question that was presented before me. We have two types of fund transfers, okay? The folks that are receiving monthly pension checks, if we've already made our contributions from the school department to the checking account to cover those checks, it's about $250,000 to $300,000 a month right now is what those folks are receiving, okay? And we're supposed to have 2 months' worth of funding in the account. So when it's time to move $600,000 into the account, we sell the assets, the investments we have, and we'll transfer that from our investment holding account out to Aetna, which is where the checking accounts are. That's transfer one. Transfer two, the school committee chair and the superintendent just signed off on the most recent one. You work for Warwick Public Schools. You don't achieve 10 years of service, so you terminate service. You're not vested in the pension. You've contributed your employee each year. By contract, we're supposed to pay 3% annual on your contributions. You leave after 8 years. I now have to send you money for $25,000. Call up, authorize the sale, wire transfer a check either to you individually, or most times it's a wire transfer to a 401k or some other tax-sheltered annuity program because you're not. So the question was, is there fees and have you moved money? The answer is yes. Have we ever taken money back as the employer? Never.
Okay. So when we were in mediation, we were talking about how the school department, the city, would fund shortfalls. And your representation was that you could withdraw money without a penalty. Is that not accurate? Is that not what you told us, that you could withdraw money out of the pension plan without a penalty?
I'm not an attorney. I know what I've done during my processes, and with Mr. Regasta whispering in my ear for clarity, the answer is yes. The two items that I talk about moving money, there was no fee, there was no penalty. So moving those funds out of the program, that's the question that was presented to me. Not whether it was coming back to Warwick Public Schools and if we could do what we did.
So the very subject matter that we were talking about, which is how do we fund these changes, didn't cross your mind. You were just talking about that you could withdraw $4 million for some other reason that wasn't germane to the topic that we were talking about, correct?
Again, I'm not an attorney, so I didn't offer an opinion. I was asked specifically, I answered specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks.
Do you receive any notices, letters, correspondences, any written communications of any kind from the actuaries?
The typical cycle is they'll come and meet with us in July, getting ready for any changes. And they meet with the investment committee, just not myself. There's 4 members on the investment committee. And then they would come in August and take the data. They would prepare the actuarial reports, and then they would present them to the investment committee in October. That's been the norm. They did contact my office when they knew, because we have standard quarterly meetings. They knew we had an April meeting coming up, and they asked to come to the April meeting because of changes that took place in January.
And when you get this information, whether in a meeting or in a report, well, specifically in any kind of report, any kind of letter, does it give black and white a number assigned as the annual required contribution?
Yeah, within the scope of the reports, yes.
Yeah, and since I believe the the line item that the school department has been allocating for the contribution, as you've stated, is 1.8 million, I take it that each year the number that the actuaries come back in their report is less than the 1.8 million?
It has been.
So I'm just confused as to how there has not been a realization over those years that there's a difference between that 1.8 million and the lesser number of maybe, depending on the year, 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, all depending on the year, of, okay, this difference of 600, 700, 800,000, depending on the year, is not required, is above the required, and would it be fair to characterize that as discretionary?
No. The analysis, you're right, we get the presentation, but then questions were brought up. In the first 2 or 3 years I was on the board, the questions is, how is it possible that you gave us an actuarial report saying the range was 1.2 to 1.6, 1.5 the first couple of years, and we contributed $1.8 million. How is it possible the fund goes down by 1.5%? And so that our unfunded liability goes up. And how bad would it have been if we gave what you were suggesting was in the report? And the answers we're giving is, those are the minimum recommendations. You folks can put in more if you think it's worthwhile. That's the type of conversations we had the first 2 or 3 years. We were at 89.9 at one point, and it dropped down to 87 or 86 change. Only before this past report, which came in October, if I'm not mistaken, the year before, we had just got back to 90. So again, putting it in context, I got a 4-year range. You've told me 2 years running I should be here, and I'm going in the wrong direction. 2 more years of continuing to do this puts us in a precarious position. And everybody look at the investment committee and say, you took over a fund that was 87, 88, 89% funded, and now you let it drop down to 80. You didn't do your job. So those are the background issues that we were wrestling with. So it only was this most recent year, when the stocks actually took off, that we got up over the 92% range. So I get the context. We get the points loud and clear, but to understand why you're asking, how could this be? It was level funded. It doesn't impact the school budget from that perspective. And so any new cost the school department is incurring needs to be dealt with, either a reduced cost someplace else or an increase in revenue, because the budget should not be structurally deficit established. Those are the premises in which decision-making is made amongst the committees.
If I may, see, from my perspective, a dollar is a dollar, and if it costs X amount of dollars to clean the schools daily, and it costs X amount of dollars, the same dollars that would go toward the overpayment, from my perspective, I think that a dollar is a dollar. Now, you said that this was background information. I'm curious, did you ever have this conversation about this background information with the full, all 5 members of the school committee, or presenting it to the 9 members of the city council in your time as finance director?
No.
Ultimately, whose decisions is it in terms of allocating funds to the school department, and whose decision is it once those funds are allocated to divide them up among priorities?
That's the budget vetting process that goes on. So the superintendent makes recommendations and the school committees makes the decisions as to the final allocations. And typically, level fund is not something that constantly gets revisited.
And so, I know that this line of questioning may seem rude, and I know that I was criticized quite a bit last year when I asked what the bottom line number is if we were to try to figure out, okay, exactly what is discretionary here, what is the bottom line that it takes to run the schools, and none of this had been brought to my attention at that time last year. So that's why I feel like it's an important conversation to have, not just for the sake of rehashing the past, but when we on the city council are asking, what is the true bottom line? What is something that this isn't something that we want to do differently? We want to allocate more funding to A, B, and C, but to make sure that the schools stay open, people get their paychecks, they get their pension checks, the bathrooms are clean. That's the line of questioning and why we have these hearings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks. And just to clarify on what you said, as what I recall was the testimony from the school department was $8 million, not a penny less. And after examining all the facts and circumstances, the arbitrator awarded 0. Councilman Larson, and Councilman Sinapi next.
Mr. Ferrucci, you twice so far have said that, or you've alluded to the fact that the pension is funded at 92% or so because of recent performances in the market, stocks, et cetera, et cetera. The $4 million that we've been talking about here this evening and since that arbitration meeting, we're not talking about General Dynamics and Apple stock that just happened to skyrocket and boosted your pension fund to 92%. We're talking about actual dollars contributed to the pension. So don't misunderstand. This isn't about a stock rallying, increasing this pension. It's about actual dollars and cents put into the pension. There's a big difference. And also, at that arbitration meeting, this mayor and the city council, we have been, it was stated in the press that the mayor and the city council raided the pension fund. Twice during that meeting, the mayor asked you, by the way, we weren't the ones that came up with the solution to the problem. The mayor asked you twice, Mr. Ferrucci, if there was going to be any tax consequence or penalty for transferring that money. Twice he asked you that, and you twice said no. The mediator asked you that same question, and you said no. I didn't hear any of the rendition that you just did tonight about what happened in the past. What you said was no, because we have done it in the past, and there was no tax consequence, and there was no penalties. You're smiling like that's not what you said. That is what you said.
I'm smiling because I think what you've just touched on is two people hearing something and answering it one way and other folks hearing it and understanding it another. Because the point that I had raised earlier already has been, were there fees? And I already said, I'm not an attorney. And so all I could go on are the two specific examples that I'm saying, no, this is it. Folks may have heard that you could do it, some folks may want to interpret it, who was at one end, but clearly I understand what you're saying. Your understanding was it was all, I'm answering the question. There's two types of examples that we move funds out. How would I answer that question? I didn't
Mr.
get
Ferrucci?
elongated. It was a simple ask and a simple answer.
It is not my understanding, it is what you stated. I'm simply stating what you stated. The mayor asked you twice, the mediator asked you, you never once indicated anything different. You never spoke any of these words that you spoke tonight. You never said that. You said, there are no penalties, there are no tax consequences, we have done it in the past. So this isn't something that...
I was asked if there were fees, sir, and
He
penalties.
asked you if there were
not
any
tax consequences.
penalties or tax consequences.
I realize it gets
In any
contentious.
event.
Okay, I just realize it gets contentious, but try not to talk over one another. I'll give you an opportunity to respond, Mr. Fucci.
So that's the way this whole process took place. Nothing was stated to what you stated tonight. But also, in light of the fact that you said here earlier this evening that you knew, and obviously this wasn't something that just came to light in the last few weeks, that you knew that you were over budget significantly. And I'm curious as to why you didn't implement a spending freeze before March 12th when you knew that you were over budget. What was the reason for not implementing this back in November or December when you certainly were able to forecast that particular issue?
The expenditures that have been approved this year have been essence of student need and safety for the better part of the school year. And so all the items that were brought forward to the school committee were properly vetted. The things that could be trimmed were trimmed. And so I just stand on, everything was brought forward publicly. And that benchmark, and there were times when the school committee disagreed with administration saying that's not at the highest level. So they said no.
So the reason for not implementing the spending freeze before March 12th was what? Because I didn't hear that answer.
It was just a communication of what we already had in place.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Sinapi.
All right, so I have a few. First, have you ever compared or looked at other school districts' budgets when looking at your own?
I'm sorry?
Have you ever looked at the budgets of other school departments when considering Warwick's?
I have on occasion reviewed Cranston's because that always happens to be a budget that gets raised in these chambers as a comparable.
That's perfect. That's what I want to talk about. So, as you're probably aware, Cranston has more teachers, more students, more schools than Warwick. Yet, we have very different line items in our budgets. So, for instance, for supplies, we budget almost $500,000 more than Cranston. Do you have any explanation for that?
No, I haven't gone into that level of detail.
All right, so then I'll skim through these with the assumption that your answer is the same, and if it's not, correct me. For purchase services, we budget $3.2 million more than Cranston. For employee benefits, $3.6 million more. For salaries, which was one of the things you actually mentioned tonight as the reason for the bloated budget, we budget a little over $500,000 more than in Cranston. And then for our total budget between the two, we're a little over 9.7, and it appears you don't have a reason for any of those. Like you said, you never went that deep into it. So how about line item 53209 on page 3 of the Warwick budget? So that would be bus monitors or bus assistants. So for that line item, it says 0
Yes.
for this year and dating back to 2017. And yet, that's one of the things that got an increase for this coming budget, right? How much those people are going to be paid?
5.3 is a purchase service where you're hiring a company from outside to provide that service.
Okay.
Our current bus monitors are on our 5.1 roster in salaries.
So how much do we pay our bus monitors right now, not counting this proposed budget?
Minimum wage, $10.50.
All right. And the proposed budget wants to put it higher, right?
We were looking at about $12. Originally, we wanted to get to 15.
So for the minimum wage figure, how much is that annually? For all of them?
I had to go into the big book. I put the aids and the bus monitors in one number for $310,000, but if you want that level, I got to just look up the breakdown further in the document.
So you're saying 310 for the bus aids and the monitors?
That's correct.
And what about for the proposed budget?
I'm sorry, bus aids and building aids and bus monitors. There's two groups.
You don't have that separated out?
It's in my big document, that's what I'm digging for. Our bus monitors, on page 38 in the big budget, 48 positions for 26,800 hours, a budget of $300,000 at about $12 an hour. So $2 an hour on the 27,000 is about a $54,000 salary increase.
All right. And do you know how much Cranston pays for that? For its bus monitors?
I do not.
So they pay $33,500. So
$33 an hour?
33,000 and change a year is
All right,
what
how
they
ma-
budget for this.
How many staff do they have?
Couldn't tell you. I know they have more students. I know
What's
they
their
have more
hourly rate?
schools.
But their city's smaller than Warwick, so you got to look at numbers of buses.
So we can explain it away potentially is what you're saying.
I can't,
Potentially. I'm not holding you to it. So that brings me back to what I originally pointed out, though, the fact that we're, despite being now smaller in teacher staff, students, and schools than Cranston, we're budgeting $3.2 million more for purchase services, more for employee benefits, another almost $500,000 for supplies. I mean, you can explain away some of these, sure, I imagine you can, and they're probably reasonable explanations. I don't see how you can explain away well over $5 million, close to $10 million in difference, and it just be accepted. Because as Councilman Corley correctly pointed out, it's cheaper when we send students out of district. In fact, it's cheaper to send a kid to private school. We could save money and send them all to private school, which is ridiculous. It boggles my mind, frankly. And the fact that you haven't even deep dived into the Cranston budget, as one you note as a comparative, worries me, because I feel like that's your job.
Mr. Sinapi, I mentioned earlier this evening already that we hired somebody who repriced our staffing, and that came in at close to $9 million. So whether you get into actually having staff organized the way Cranston is, that's a whole nother initiative. Warwick was developed over time. We trimmed back to meet the needs of during consolidation. So, yeah, if that's a project that is going to get some merit and move it forward, and you come to find out how they staff their classes and their special ed ratios and all the hosts of other issues, that's pretty significant initiative.
Yeah,
We were
what
just
you're-
saying,
what
if
you're
we
saying
just
makes-
had their contracting paid the salaries that they had and kept our current staffing pattern as it currently exists today, I could save you $9 million. To me, that's a pretty significant issue.
What you're saying makes sense, however, we're talking about it here and now, and we shouldn't be. It should be talked about a long time ago. Not to mention, as I already stated, a review by you of their budget should have been done a long time ago. But, moving on. So, how much, if you know, did the Carullo action cost you to bring?